Why do you think the Nixon administration shut down the research of psychedelics 40, 50 years ago? Hey everyone, welcome to this TDR Psychedelic Exclusive. I am your host, Shad Dales. Thanks for checking in. Today we're talking psychedelics. A lot of big news last week pertaining to some notable companies in the space. If you have questions, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear back from you. We want to know the development of this industry and how it's going to progress over the next year or so. We got a big name person in this morning. He's the CEO of Algernon Pharmaceuticals. Chris Moreau trades on the ticker symbol AGN on the CSE and on the OTC under the ticker symbol AGNPF. Christopher Moreau joins us. Finally, we get to catch and connect. Good to see you. How are things?
Good, Shad. Thanks for inviting me on the show. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's always this industry. When you look back, you're a pharmaceutical company. You have a division in psychedelics now. Before we get into company specifics, I got to ask, with your background, rich in the pharma industry, rich in research, what appealed you to I guess, dive in and do more research and more investigating when it came to the psychedelic space?
Well, I must admit, I was not an immediate convert. One of our larger shareholders reached out to me probably, now we're talking about 2.5 years ago when psychedelics
Yep.
were really percolating. And he said, I want you to look at this space. And we're working on idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, working on kidney disease. And I said, really? And he said, listen, his view is if the market wants green ties, then you sell them green ties. So I said, look, I will have a peek at it.
Yeah.
But I said, we need to be taken seriously. We're a pharma play company. We're not going to be setting up clinics and hiring doctors. We don't do vertical marketing. So
Yep.
it means you have to have good clinical data, preclinical rather. You have to have a pathway to human approval. And I said and you have to have good intellectual property. And psilocybin, psilocin, DMT, these are all natural compounds.
Yeah.
So I was very hesitant, but so look.
Had some reservations. Yeah, I can imagine.
But the energy in the market at the time made me have a look at it. As a CEO of a startup or a non-revenue pharma, you have two things on your mind. How do I access capital and how do I access capital?
100%.
And so
100%. And that's at the forefront of this industry right now. So I got to ask, when you saw the renaissance of this resurgence of like the industry from a couple of years ago, definitely a downturn for the past 18 months, almost close to 2 years now. Yeah. Conversations I've been having recently is it seems like there's a lot of big announcements that could be happening within the next 9 months. What is the sentiment that you're hearing about the industry?
I think two things. Sentiment about general capital markets. I called the CEO of our largest hedge fund investor in Algernon, and I said, your ears to the ground, what's the markets like? He said,
yeah,
bad, but going to be good. So that's
okay.
His view on the market. On psychedelics, I think that two key issues. One is in the early days, a lot of money was spent, and perhaps now some of the funds are pulling back and saying that there was this bit of early frenzy. Now let's zero in. We're looking at intellectual property. We're looking at more clear paths to revenue. How does this get monetized? So my view is that there will be one or two breakthroughs and that high water will lift all boats.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You talk about intellectual property. So let's talk about, your company itself. You describe itself as a drug repurposing company that investigates safe and already approved drugs for new disease applications. You then move them efficiently and safely into human trials. For our investors hearing about your company for the first time, there's a lot of people within this space that are already familiar with your business. But for those that want to learn more, what would you say is the primary business strategy that you have right now?
Risk reduction, reduce capital cost, identify compounds that have already been approved, that are off patent, that have had limited exposure, so not sold in the US or Europe.
Okay.
You can find potential new uses. Most drugs are polypharma. They have multiple effects. Mm-hmm. You can take an older drug. It's been done several times. They're billion-dollar drugs. Take an old drug, find out a new potential use for it, file new intellectual property, get it into human trials quickly, efficiently, and get that drug approved and join the billion-dollar club. That's Algernon's model.
Sounds like a great strategy.
Well,
Sounds execution's another thing though, but yeah, that's like well, let's touch the news that happened last week back on February 21st. You announced your subsidiary Algernon Neuroscience has added a new clinical research program for the treatments of traumatic brain injury, otherwise known as TBI.
yeah.
The program focuses on AP-188, which will be a synthetic version of DMT, and this grabbed my attention. So, with your announcement, you're planning to be the first company globally to investigate TBI with DMT and plan to begin phase 2 trials a little later this year in Q4. So, I'm curious to learn, like, what benefits does DMT potentially provide for the treatment of brain trauma?
So let's take it back to the early research done by University of California, Davis investigator Olson. He
Yep.
exposed cortical neurons from rats to 3 different psychedelic drugs: amphetamine, DMT, and LSD. And all of those neurons showed growth. So this was what's known as a class effect. Scientists love this because you can see the growth in those neurons compared to control, which means a neuron that wasn't given any psychedelic drug. DMT is ideal as a potential therapeutic agent because it has a half-life in the body of 8 minutes. So it gets metabolized and goes out of your system very quickly. LSD is a
Right.
problem. It has a 24-hour half-life. So it's not only
Exactly.
can be a bad trip, it can be a very long trip. So what we saw is that neuroplasticity, the potential of the brain to rewire and make new neural pathways, is part of the response after an injury. So we
Right.
decided to focus on stroke initially. There was an animal study for stroke in Hungary where they created an injury in the rats, caused a stroke, gave them DMT. Within 30 days, the rats that got DMT had almost a full recovery of their motor function, and they had a much diminished area of dead cells. So a stroke is an
Are you?
injury to the brain, so is a
Wow.
traumatic brain injury. The same mechanisms apply. The brain needs to rewire. It makes new neural pathways, new connections. DMT has huge potential as a healing drug for injuries to the brain.
So, as you said, LSD to 24 hours. And I think this is what's grabbing my attention. Like, describe DMT, as you said, 8 minutes, 20, 30 minutes with some of the stuff I'm reading in with other therapies that are being studied. On paper, that seems to be a lot more attractive if people are going to be interested within this space, the shorter time version. But what happens within that, 10, 20, 30-minute window? It's obviously a lot more intense than, say, other compounds, is it not? Or am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it is. And let me give you the different take on it, because right now, and let's explain to the listeners, not a lot of people know about DMT. They know about ayahuasca. Ayahuasca
Yeah.
is DMT from one plant and another compound from another plant mixed together and brewed as a tea. If you took DMT and swallowed it, ingested it, your gut would break it down. It won't go in your bloodstream. There's a process in your stomach that sort of inhibits. But if you combine it with this other compound, then your DMT can be absorbed. So it's a little slower if you take it orally. It goes up into your bloodstream and holds it.
Yeah.
But as it gets metabolized, it goes out. We're taking a different approach. DMT hits a receptor in the brain called sigma-1. It hits a few other serotonin-like receptors, but sigma-1 produces BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It is a protein involved in healing. So in our study of DMT, we're just not giving somebody a dose. It goes in and out. We're dosing them for 6 hours. We want to keep hitting that sigma-1 receptor. Interestingly enough, in our research, we don't believe we have to give people the psychedelic dose. At least for stroke patients. Now think about it. You've had a stroke. You're in a state of confusion. It's an injury. A lot of stroke drugs have failed because it was causing hallucinations. But part of the preclinical data is showing that you still get brain neuroplasticity without the psychedelic experience. We're not making a moral judgment here. This is one of health. If you've had a stroke and you're getting DMT, if we don't have to change your consciousness, but we're helping your brain heal, that makes it even much more attractive as a drug we can deliver when you're in the ICU. And Shad, interesting note, 85% of stroke victims that have the most common type of stroke have no treatments available. This is an enormous need, and we hope DMT will actually be a huge healing agent for people that have suffered that injury.
I was speaking last week with a number of funds in New York, and they're talking with how they're speaking with world-renowned psychiatrists and how they're tired of prescribing the same therapy medication for the past 35 years. 35 years.
Yeah.
So your background with pharma, and now you're dipping into the psychedelic space, and clearly from what you've shared, this has piqued your interest a lot. What do you think is the overall perception that pharma is looking at psychedelics now? Is it garnering attention?
I think the more that we talk about it, the more that it's written about, shows like your show today, the more. I mean, look, the first response is, and I had a journalist call last week talking about was I worried about the fact that it's a psychedelic? And I said, have you ever heard of morphine? There are tons of drugs that cause hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
This whole psychedelics were villainized by the U.S. government years ago. The big problem was that they made it so difficult, researchers can't even get their hands on it. And so Big Pharma likes two things. They like typically NCEs, new chemical entities.
Right.
They like phase 2 data. As all of us in this space start moving our compounds towards phase 2 data, where you're testing the drug in human beings that have the condition you're trying to treat, that can be powerfully convincing. You also have to have good intellectual property. Do you have a method of use patent? Do you have a dosing patent? Formulation? Do you have a novel salt patent? Can you get orphan disease indication? These are all different intellectual property or patent techniques that can interest Big Pharma. And here's why. Why would somebody invest $30 million in a human trial if at the end of the day everybody can sell into the market? Mm-hmm. So Big Pharma needs to protect the asset because of the cost to advance. It's just business.
Well, let's tackle, I guess, the trend or what's going on in the industry right now. Needless to say, capital raising in these market conditions is challenging for a lot of companies, to say the least. We saw last week Field Trip needing to hire an independent committee. Cybin, laying off 15% of their staff. These were companies that raised over $80 million at one time. So as we focus on, I guess, specifically your strategy, where are you right now as far as cash position and burn rate is concerned? And do you have enough capital to get the study through to a phase 2 clinical trial?
So when we talk about access, or rather our capital, always go back to our last quarterly financial statement. I think there was $500,000 or $600,000 in the till. Algernon Pharma, like other companies in the space, were publicly traded. We go back to the market from time to time under the right conditions and raise capital either through prospectus offerings or private placements. In our case, we've created a subsidiary called Algernon Neuroscience.
Okay.
We've spun out all of our psychedelic program into Algernon Neuroscience. And we are going to raise up to $10 million in capital through what's known as a Tier 2 Regulation A, or Reg A, financing in the U.S. So we've applied with the regulators, with the U.S. SEC, and we have provided them all of our financial, audited, our business plan. There's an offering memorandum of sorts you provide. We expect that approval shortly, and we'll begin a digital online marketing campaign to raise capital for Algernon Neuro. This is a different approach. Reg A's have raised billions of dollars. They're not the classic stock market investor. Millennial audience, they punt 1 to 3K on average. They can go online, invest. They use their credit card, Visa, Apple Pay. There's a portal that's been developed to allow their capacity to invest in different companies. What will be, I think, unusual about Algernon Neuro is there's not a lot of what I call a pure pharma play offerings on Reg A that I looked at. the potential for Algernon Neuro to do an IPO when we get data from our phase 2 stroke and TBI study. That will be I think, an exciting exit strategy, and that's something we would be working towards.
Being CEO of a pharmaceutical company, what excites you the most from an investor standpoint concerning this industry?
I think the moment of inflection when you have phase 2 data and the study is large enough that the statistical significance, called the p-value, because as a CEO, you're trying to convert people whose original thought is, that sounds interesting, but tell me more. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
Psychedelic for stroke. It's quite rewarding to be able to put together a business case to be able to convince somebody to make an investment in your business and then to deliver to them an answer. We can't control how the drug will ultimately perform.
Yeah.
All of us follow, you go animal studies, you do phase 1, is it safe? And then you go into phase 2. But my biggest joy will come when we've run that study, and my hope would be that actually the drug that we've been advancing for so long actually ends up helping people. So it's a great space to be in.
Well said.
You're trying to bring return to investors, but you're doing that by also helping humanity.
Yeah, when you have that phase 2B data, that's when Big Pharma comes in and starts to sponsor basically phase 3 trials for people to understand the timeline and streamline of it all, correct?
Correct. Let me share one more thing with you and your listeners. You can get approved on a phase 2 sometimes.
You can. Okay.
FDA says you still have to do your phase 3, but your data is so good it's not ethical to not make it available. And in certain disease indications, TBI, 70 million traumatic brain injuries globally per year, there are no pharmacological treatments. Ischemic stroke, only 15% of people will either get a clot buster or surgical removal of the clot. 85% have nothing. So if we have good phase 2 data and we have it powered enough, 60, 70 patients, where the clinicians, the statisticians look at it and say, this data is repeatable, it's not an artifact of the study, you can apply for approval immediately. May not get it, but it has been done. There are phase 2 drugs that have been approved, and that would be a path that we'd be looking at.
Well, there's a couple of things that grabs my interest about TBI and your angle that you're doing with this, and as well the compound DMT. It's definitely caught a lot of attention. Last month, there was news from Small Pharma, who announced in a phase 2A trial involving DMT, they saw significant reduction in depressive symptoms to treat major depressive disorder. And here's something that's even more important that came out of the announcement. The therapy resulted, as we said before, a 20 to 30-minute psychedelic experience. This is quite different from most other compounds. So as most psychedelic drug development companies focus on mental health disorders, you're focusing on the physical order disorder side. Do you think, or I should say, how much research do you think has been unmet when it comes to physical disorders pertaining to DMT?
You know what? I think that there's a huge gap, and to share some background, we just didn't jump into traumatic brain injury. I had my science group. I said, look, I want you to go out and identify for me the 10 top traumatic brain injury global scientists and clinicians. How? By the number of papers they're published and by their research. So we identified 10. We took the top 3, and my team reached out to them, told them who Algernon was, told them about DMT. We set up meetings very quickly over 3 or 4 weeks, and we proposed the idea: is neuroplasticity, the rewiring and healing of the brain, an important target for TBI? Overwhelming yes. And is the exploration and investigation of DMT as an agent to encourage neuroplasticity, is that a good idea? Absolutely. 2 out of the 3 have joined our advisory board to help guide us in that path. We announced Peter Moss in our news release last week. We have another announcement coming up. The 3rd wanted to stay independent, still going to help us, but is working more on the grant and research side, didn't want to align with a particular company, but still very excited There are no drugs to help treat TBI, and you've got quite a wide range. You have penetrating and non-penetrating traumatic brain injury, but you can have a fatal non-penetrating, a slip and a fall, shakes up the brain, causes inflammation, a coma, someone becomes a fatal injury. You could have a penetrating injury like a shotgun or a gun blast. Some survives, but it's penetrating. So you've got this wide range. Most of the drugs have gone after acute, serious. We would probably focus on, there's a Glasgow score of sort of mild to medium TBI to start. You can have a slip and fall, you feel fine, you don't lose consciousness, but a few weeks or months after, you can start to see the effects. Maybe you have some cognitive issues, you might have motor function challenges, memory.
Do we know the number as to how many people are affected by TBI in North America annually? An idea?
70 million globally. That's the
70 million, that
globally
many
of TBIs. And we go from simple slip and falls to motor vehicle. And in developing nations where more vehicles are being produced and available because of cost and income going up, you have this massive surge due to motor vehicles.
I find that TBI, a lot of the time, whenever there's any focus pertaining to it, it's surrounded by athletes. Is that an angle or approach that you would take? I like the approaches to some of the stuff that you're saying, the everyday person. Slip and falls, strokes, motor vehicle accidents, people that I guess can relate to, and a lot broader size market. But has there been talks about speaking with athletes, or is that something that doesn't really interest, or it's not an approach that you plan on taking?
It is an approach. I'm in discussion with a couple of athletes that have, as an example, Mike Tyson has made some investments, and these are relationships where you try to bring awareness to your company program, your stock, what you're doing, because people are following. Aaron Rodgers has announced his taking DMT.
Isn't it crazy what he's gone through this week with the media?
Yeah.
When I look at ESPN and they're saying, I'm upset because he's not focusing enough on football, and I'm taking a step back going, I can't come down on like they're just misinformed or uninformed, with regards to the advancement of the industry. But that is a good measuring stick as to how much education this industry has to grow and educate people.
And the other point you make about professional sports, and some might say, well, you know what, don't focus on sports where people are getting injured. I mean, they're over 21 and they're going into that intentionally. But even just normal recreation, like your kids playing hockey or soccer. You
good
can
point.
have people that have concussions, and so the idea of trying to align with somebody that has a following who can, maybe they've had some anecdotal experience with DMT and it's helped change their life, or maybe they've had an injury and DMT has helped them. You have to be careful with that. I mean, we're we're a pure pharma company. We do everything on science. We don't use anecdotal data. Something that may have happened to somebody that's not been tested under normal conditions. But it does help bring awareness to what we're doing and some celebrity. There's sometimes there's more caution now because if certain companies don't do well, then celebrities that attach themselves, sometimes this issue of liability is there. So we proceed cautiously on that front, and celebrities as well. There are a lot of celebrities that have had strokes, and they're more supporting from the raise capital for research or for charity and so on. So look, it is one avenue to help bring eyes on what we're doing.
Well, as we said, Small Pharma had some big news pertaining to DMT a couple weeks back, which saw major reduction in depressive disorder. Yet the stock didn't move like at all, and the direct result of that is just access to institutional capital. And everybody needs to get to the NASDAQ, I think, obviously, to get to that institutional interest. And there's that $75 million market cap threshold. So I assume that is the strategy long term as to where you want to be. And do you feel confident that you could achieve that?
Well, if you're a pharma company, you definitely want to be on the NASDAQ. You've got that a global audience. U.S. funds can't buy stocks on the CSE or TSX.
Right.
So, but you do have to have a certain amount of shareholders' equity. You do have to have a certain minimum share price. Corporately, we tried to uplist last May. That's when the capital markets were exploding, and we were unable to take that step. So, sitting back, this is why we created Algernon Neuroscience and spun that out as a private entity, and why we're going to raise capital through the Regulation A financing path in the U.S. For others, it may have to be a combination of reverse RTO. There may be opportunities on the NASDAQ
Yep.
where you've got shells, companies in biotech that have exhausted their pipeline. You're probably looking at $5 to $10 million for that shell. So sometimes you can do an RTO, maybe a merger. Some of the bigger players in the space, the Compass,
See that happening. Yeah.
they can reach out and start to acquire others. But then it's going to be a real focus on, well, what do you really have?
Yeah.
Do you have intellectual property
Exactly.
that will protect the investment that is to move your compound forward? A lot of companies were sort of focused on the same space. Some companies made changes to their core molecule, but now they're back in preclinical. That's a very risky period. Only about 90% of drugs fail in preclinical due to toxicity, safety issues. So it's a Darwinian model to start.
Yeah.
With capital markets, you can have great news and you have selling in your stock.
I know.
And so it's different. Guys have cash and they're like, why should I buy your stock today? It's $2 today. It'll be $2 tomorrow, and it could be $1.50 next week. What's my urgency to buy today? It's a very, very tough space to be in right now.
Well, when you look at companies like Field Trip and Cybin that had over 80 million plus and make announcements like that, there is cause for concern short term for the industry. But the conversations I'm having with like potential MAPS data coming out again, the growth of that company, you're talking about Health Canada potentially announcing the same thing as what Australia did, FDA approving MDMA within the next 9 months. There's a lot of optimism that's building fast within this industry right now. What would you say is the news that we get is the turning point in this industry for institutions to jump in?
Well, again, it's the complexity, I think, is first off, you have private VC. So if you're private equity, they will look at your business plan. They've got their risk model. They don't mind investing in a certain amount in preclinical and phase 1, phase 2, and so on. For the public funds and for public companies, when you get into phase 2 data, does your drug, can you see that signal for whatever disease you're trying to treat? And I think there are some phase 2 programs that are in play. So I think phase 2 data, but the combination also has to be that there is a business play to it, because phase 3 trials are expensive. And typically the best phase 3 trials outcomes are when a big pharma is driving it. They just have that fantastic team and legacy and information, and they can put that trial together where you're going to increase your chances of success. But look, going back to what my hedge fund guy said earlier, I talked about his outlook is good for this year, and with a tighter field, there's going to be some horses that break out, cross the finish line. That's going to be good for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Last thing I'll leave you with is, do you believe DMT will be a game changer when it comes to people from traumatic brain injury, like having a stroke or a motor vehicle accident? Do you think this changes, I guess, that sort of landscape, that health landscape pertaining to this specific compound?
I think it will be an incredible game changer. The data is looking very promising preclinically. Sometimes data doesn't translate well from an animal into people. But what we're looking at and what we're just testing ourselves, we're running a phase 1 today in Europe for DMT. We're treating patients for 6-hour time periods, and then every second day We're giving them DMT for a duration never seen before. And I think the potential for neuroplasticity, that healing process is confirmed. BDNF is involved in helping the brain to heal. And don't forget, the current classification of most psychedelics in the US is that there is no therapeutic benefit. We show a therapeutic benefit, we go back, we get that drug approved for a particular indication. Everything we do, the ice starts to thaw.
Yep.
And more opportunities open. More scientists start to study target mechanism, and this could open up a floodgate. That's what our hope is, and that's why we sponsored the microdose conference, by the way, last fall.
How was that?
It was very good. It was a great opportunity to be talking to media and other companies that are working in this space. We had a chance to present the business model of Algernon and also specifically DMT in our stroke. We had Dr. Rick Strassman join me in my presentation. He's the father of sort of DMT. He coined the phrase the spirit molecule. He's helping guide Algernon on our stroke program. And we did it to help the whole industry too. It wasn't just about Algernon and getting our name out front and center. Our fund, a sponsorship, allowed that conference to go on. And again, high water will raise all boats.
That's great. Great way of putting it. Well, I think a lot of people are interested. As we said earlier in this podcast, psychiatrists, prescribing same medication for the past 35 years. And think about it. How much a vehicle's advanced in 35 years? It's no longer can we just look at pure revenue and profits that Big Pharma is making. We even did a podcast last week where a CDC report was showing that 1 in 3 high school female students have contemplated suicide. Think about that, like where we're at right now.
Yeah,
it's staggering to say the least.
And I think we have to drop the fear of what psychedelics. Let's explore it. And, as you get further on in your life, you're getting close to 60, you've heard the song, Is That All There Is?
Right.
And if now you can open up if there's a psychedelic experience that can change your views and your paradigm, and it can be done safe, in a healthy way, in a safe way, with guidance and professional care, that's a fantastic hope for humanity. We may uncover information about life and ourselves that has been held back from us. So
I know I said
fear.
I know I said one last question, but I really mean it this time. This is one question I wanted to ask before I go. Why do you think the Nixon administration shut down the research of psychedelics 40, 50 years ago? It's probably 50 now.
I mean, from what I've read, it was really an effort to stamp out the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Yep.
And the sort of probably advisors said, look, these are drugs that we can, in fact, that they've got lots of street use. Under the wrong environment, I don't want to have a psychedelic experience walking around in traffic. No. And so the uncontrolled early days probably caused a lot of fear. And but they really went after it in a big time way. My biggest issue was the way they did it. They shut down ease of research.
Yeah.
I mean, I was telling you earlier, Yale University came to Algernon and said one of the top psychiatrists in the world that they wanted to do a DMT study and he couldn't get any because almost impossible to access. And they said, do you guys have any extra DMT kicking around? And we said, we'll help you out, Yale, which we did. And they're running a depression study, will be shortly, with our DMT supply. So, I think that we've got to put the fear aside. Let's do the proper research. Let's learn about these compounds, and let's figure out how to help people heal. And that's the goal.
The most compelling thing is whether you and I agree or disagree on how people view this industry. The most compelling thing is data. And that's what sells this industry right now, is the data is overwhelmingly positive, which was why there's a lot of optimism pertaining to the industry. This has been great. Hope we can have more conversations with you. Love learning a lot from you, but this is makes this podcast so good, is meeting people like yourself and educating people on the industry as a whole and how we see it progressing. But listen, appreciate the time. Please keep in touch, and best of luck, obviously, on the reggae and the raising of $10 million with your subsidiary Algernon Neuroscience. I'm sure that'll go very well.
Thanks, Shad. Good to connect with you, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Christopher. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information. Share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.